All right. Hey guys, and welcome to our second video that Trevor and I are putting out through Sacred Margins. We're actually going to start having a conversation that's going to be over a couple videos about some new terminology and some things we want to talk to you that really grow out of Sacred Margins, our relationship, a lot of the dynamic between Trevor and I and the way we relate, kind of our gifting. So you're going to hear us talking a lot about prophets and priests here through these videos, and we want to introduce what these things mean, what we talk about when we use these terms, why they're important. So in this first video, we want to talk to you about prophets. And Trevor, I really recognize you as this is the role that you have, not just your gifting, but through your education and a lot of just who you are. You tend to be a prophet. So, can you explain to us a little bit about what that maybe means and what role that plays within the church?
Yeah, so, and to be honest, even using the word prophet makes me a little, maybe not nervous, but you're like, whoa, I don't want to say that about myself. But kind of when you look at kind of the function of a prophet, what you really kind of see is you see typically two things. Typically, a person who kind of stands on the outside of the system and speaks into it. And then you typically see someone who wants to challenge assumptions and kind of challenge the status quo. And so I identify with that part of it. I worked in ministry for almost 10 years and then got out of it and went on to do the PhD stuff. And I still deeply care about the church and I deeply care about what goes on there, but I'm not, formally a part of that system. And as far as how I get my paycheck. And so, being in that position allows you to see things that you don't always see when you're on the inside. And it allows you to maybe expand your view and look at other things that you normally wouldn't look at. And so it gives you the ability to kind of speak into a different system and say, hey, I see things that you probably don't. And I care about you, and I want you to know that these are important things. The problem is typically prophets and people inside the system are very mistrustful of one another. And so sometimes the people inside the system kind of say, oh, well, who's this guy? He doesn't work for a church and they don't, really care about what's going on with us. They just have some sort of agenda that they're trying to drive. And then for people in my position, often kind of take the other view of looking down on people and saying, oh, well, you lowly church people just don't get it. And, to be frank, neither one of those positions is very helpful. And neither one of them actually moves things forward.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I really relate to that as someone who actually is still inside the system, and we'll talk about that in another video. But that idea of mistrust, and it's a lot about attitude, and the assumption is prophets don't care.
Right.
They don't care about the system, but that's totally not the case because you wouldn't speak up if you didn't still love. Like if you're talking about a prophet about the church, you wouldn't speak up if you didn't care deeply about the church as a system. Right?
Mm-hmm. And it's, it's not that I have less invested, but if my paycheck and my livelihood and my, just ability to function as an adult doesn't hang on my connection with a church, I can say a lot more things than someone who does. And I think a lot of times we get to the point and we understand, hey, I could push the envelope here, but I still have to feed my family. And that's okay, but we need to have people who come in and say, you know what, you can't fire me, so
Right.
here's what you really need to hear.
Right. And so instead of distrust from those who like myself, who still draw a paycheck from a church, who
Mhm.
still operate in that role, so instead of distrust in that, really there should be a little bit more trust of that, and that people in my position need prophets, those who speak from outside the system. So I understand because we're all heavily invested in the things we care about, and so we want, we care, our feelings can get hurt sometimes when we hear what sounds like criticism from prophetic voices.
Hmm.
But instead, they're often saying things that I wish I could say. But like you said, I really can't say that. So instead of it being an outside voice, the thing that I really appreciate about prophets as someone who's still deeply inside the system of church is that I need those voices. They are and voices that are prophetic voices are not outside the church family. They just sometimes stand outside of the systems. And I think that's an important distinction to make because prophets are not other and they're not on the fringe. They just have an outside perspective sometimes. That just like any system, churches can be deeply inwardly focused. So much so that our sensibilities become warped. And in business, they bring in consultants just that
Right.
wouldn't necessarily say anything different than the bosses would say, the management would say in that corporate system, but just the outside voice lends credibility
Yeah.
and honesty, like you were talking about. And I think that's such a valued system. And a church as an organization, with all its flaws, if it's going to be an organization like that, has to have some outside consultant prophetic voices. And so, as someone inside the system, if someone like you or someone who may feel like they kind of serve this role, you are deeply important to the system's operation. And so you are not outside. You're definitely part of the family. You just serve a very specific role.
Yeah. And I kind of see it. It's not. It's not even an outsider's perspective. It's just a different perspective
Right.
because on the inside, you're worried about, well, Sunday's coming and I've got to do this and I've got to do this and I've got to do this. And I don't have to worry about that.
Right.
And I can kind of concentrate on different areas. So, like for me, I concentrate a lot on diversity and leadership and those kind of things. And I read really well in those areas and I research in those areas. And I can kind of come and say, hey, this is what I've learned, and you need to kind of understand that, and you need that voice.
And
But again, it's
one of the things we'll talk about going forward is the balance between those two things. I
yeah,
think a lot, and without the prophetic voice, you lose a lot of balance. I think so.
hmm yeah.
Yeah.
So as we're moving forward, we're just going to be kind of using these terms, prophet and priest, and so we wanted to kind of introduce them to you because one, both of us fill one of those roles, and two, your initial reaction might be like, well, what in the world are they talking about? But so we kind of want to introduce prophet to you today, and then next week we will talk about what it means to be a priest. So thanks for tuning in and check out our website for further updates.
All right. Grace and peace, everybody.